So hello, everyone. My name is Bernie Schlager. I am Executive Director of the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion at Pacific School of Religion. And welcome to the first Lavender Lunch of our spring semester. You are joining us today to hear the Reverend Blayne Higa speak on It's Okay Not to Be Okay in Affirming Shin Buddhist Spirituality. Just to note that we are recording this lecture and we will be posting it online later, but we will not include in that the chat. So allow me, if you would, to introduce our speaker, and then they will take it away, and there will be time for discussion and questions following Reverend Higa's presentation. So here we go. Reverend Blayne Higa is the resident minister of the Kona Hongwanji Buddhist Temple in Kealakekua, Hawaii. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from the Institute of Buddhist Studies here in Berkeley, California, with a focus on Shin Buddhist ministry and chaplaincy. He previously served as assistant minister of the Kona Hongwanji Buddhist Temple and as assistant chapel for the Pacific Buddhist Academy in Honolulu, Hawaii. Before entering the ministry, Blayne spent over 17 years in state government and nonprofit fundraising. He holds a Master of Public Administration degree as well as a certificate in urban and regional planning, which I told him I thought was very cool, from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And he received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. Reverend Blayne is the co-chair of the Committee on Social Concerns for the Kona Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii. He also serves on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii and Vibrant Hawaii. He is the past president of the Mo'ilili Hongwanji Board of Directors and former first vice president of the Kona Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii. Reverend Blayne received Tokudo ordination in 2012 and Kyoshi certification in 2018 from the Jodo Shinshu Hongwanji Ha in Kyoto, Japan. So without any further ado, I welcome Reverend Blayne Higa.
Thank you very much, Bernie. Aloha, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this Lavender Lunch and for being here. It's nice to be here with you. Let me begin actually just by asking, how many people know about Shin Buddhism or are familiar with Jodo Shinshu? A few? Yeah. So I'll begin my presentation actually just with a short primer on Jodo Shinshu in general, and just some of our basic foundational principles, just so you have a framework and a context to understand, our spirituality and how that influences my work and my life. And so let me begin by sharing my screen with all of you. So first and foremost, the essentials of Jodo Shinshu. So our teaching is called Jodo Shinshu, which is the true essence of Pure Land Buddhist teaching. Jodo is Pure Land and Shinshu, true teaching. Our founder was the monk Shinran Shonin, who lived in 12th century Japan. And so the name of our school is the Jodo Shinshu Hongwanji Ha, which is based in Kyoto, Japan. And our head temple is also in Kyoto. And our object of reverence is Amida Buddha, or Namo Amida Butsu. Amida Buddha being the Buddha of infinite light and life, one of the many cosmic Buddhas in Buddhism. And so we are a Pure Land, Mahayana Pure Land school of Buddhism that originated in Japan. And so our primary scriptures, since there are thousands of scriptures, and sutras in the Buddhist canon, we revere the 3 Pure Land sutras, or as primary to our school. And so our teaching is attaining the entrusting heart, awakening to the compassion of Amida Tathagata, or Buddha, through the working of the primal vow, we shall walk the path of life, reciting Amida's name, the Nembutsu. At the end of life, we will be born in the Pure Land and attain Buddhahood, returning at once to this delusional world to guide people to awakening. And so our way of life, so guided by the teaching of Shinran Shonin, we shall listen to the compassionate calling of the Tathagata and recite the Nembutsu, while always reflecting on ourselves amidst our feelings of regret and joy. We shall live expressing our gratitude without depending on petitionary prayer or superstition. And our purpose, the Hongwanji School, is a community of people joined together, revering the teaching of Shinran Shonin and saying the Nembutsu. We seek to share with others the wisdom and compassion of Amida Tathagata. By doing so, we shall work toward the realization of a society in which everyone is able to live a life of spiritual fulfillment. And so you'll notice our school is called the Hongwanji, and Hongwanji is the name of the temple. And so Hongan in Japanese means primal vow or original vow, and Ji is the Japanese word for temple. So that's the name of our school and our temple. So our object of reverence, like I mentioned, is Amida Buddha, which is a combination of Amitabha, which means boundless light, or infinite wisdom and compassion, or wisdom and understanding, and Amitayus, which is boundless life, or infinite compassion or caring. And Amida, in our tradition, is a symbol or an expression of oneness, which is formless and timeless reality. And our founder Shinran explains that the oneness, out of deep compassion, took the form as a bodhisattva, who eventually became the Buddha, Amida Buddha, to establish the Pure Land and to lead beings to Buddhahood. And so that's how we understand and encounter, right, the divine or the holy within our tradition. So the name, right? So as you saw on the previous slide, Amida Buddha can be depicted often as a pictorial scroll or a statue, but also Amida can also be portrayed as the name, the Nembutsu. So this picture is of the myogo, or the name of Namo Amida Butsu, which is also an object of reverence in our tradition. So, which means I entrust in the Buddha of all-inclusive wisdom and all-embracing compassion. And so Nembutsu in Japanese means nen, or nem, to think on or to remember, and butsu, Buddha. So to remember Buddha or to think on Buddha. So, and the ultimate religious experience within Jodo Shinshu, or Shin Buddhism, is this concept called Shinjin, which is called true entrusting, or the entrusting heart. So you have two characters, Chinese characters, Shin, which means to entrust or trust or confidence, and Jin, and the character for heart or mind, heart and mind. And so Shinjin is the entrusting that is awakened within each person through the working of the primal vow. Shinjin refers to Amida's compassion when it becomes apparent to the person thus liberated and awakened. And Shinjin is the true cause. Therefore, we recite the name of Amida Buddha in gratitude for receiving compassion, for receiving wisdom in our life and the work of Shinjin is a very elusive term in our tradition. It's a very complex experience, a complex term, right? To talk about it, right? And jokingly, right? Remember the movie Fight Club? And the first rule of Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club, right? And so Shinjin sometimes is kind of like that. We don't really talk about it, but it's so central to our religious experience. because it is the realization of the working of the Buddha in our lives, right? That awakening to the inconceivable working of liberation for us. So the topic of my talk today, right, is it's okay not to be okay, right? So in Shin Buddhism, this idea of saying I'm not okay has great power, has great deep significance to how we understand our relationship to the divine and to this religious path that we live. And so the phrase or the name Namo Amida Butsu is this expression of the union of myself and timeless reality. So Namo Amida Butsu, right? So Namo means to entrust, or to say I give up. And what do I give up to, or what do I entrust in, is Amida Butsu, which is timeless reality, right? Or a power that is beyond my limited self. And so we can understand my own life, and the life that sustains me becomes one in the voicing of Namo Amida Butsu. And so Jodo Shinshu itself is a non-meditative path. We don't do formal meditation in our tradition. Our practice, right, is this saying of the Buddha's name. But more importantly, deeper actually, is the hearing of the working of Amida Buddha, the calling voice of compassion and wisdom in our lives. And the Nembutsu itself, our recitation of it, is the acknowledgement of receiving this wisdom and compassion, is this acknowledgement of the working of enlightenment in my life. And so Shinran Shonin, as you see here, is the 12th century founder of our school. And for Shinran, he realized that the spiritual journey to perfect awakening in the Pure Land was a journey through imperfection. Shin Buddhist scholar Dr. Taitetsu Uno once described the Pure Land path as taking place by descending into the valley, the shadow of the mountain. Now, he believes that it is in the valley and shadows where Shin spirituality flourishes, because it is where we encounter the dynamic working of Amida's wisdom and compassion. Normally, we think of the spiritual path as ascending a mountain. And in traditional Buddhism, you do practices and you eventually reach the pinnacle, the top of the mountain, right? You reach some level of awakening or enlightenment. But in Shin Buddhism, we actually go down into the valley because Shinran himself realized that for him, it wasn't about reaching the top of the mountain, right? That it was about living this ordinary life filled with all the passions, all the delusions, and it is because of that we are embraced by the working of great wisdom and compassion. And so this metaphor of going into the shadows, right into the valley, illustrates Shinran's fundamental spiritual insight of imperfection and radical acceptance, which leads to a life of transformation, of healing, and of compassionate action. Shinran's spiritual path was one of critical self-reflection about his own limitations as a human being, by awakening to the activity of perfect wisdom and compassion in his life. Now, while Shin Buddhism is not a meditative path, that does not mean we don't live a meditative life, right? A life of self-reflection, a life of deep introspection. And that's what Shinran believed that our path in ordinary life is a path of everyday awakening, of everyday illumination to ourselves and to the working of the Buddha in our lives. Professor Mark Uno describes Shinran's spiritual awakening as, at its deepest level, he saw himself as the recipient of the gift of Dharma rather than its dispenser. His true Buddhist identity came effectively into relief only in the solitary light of his own self-awareness. The truth of the self can only be seen when one is alone with the universe. And so a primary concept, right, in this awakening to the working of the Buddha in Shin Buddhism is this concept of deep mind, which is an aspect of Shinjin, or true entrusting. Deep mind is the deeply entrusting mind, and there are two aspects. One is to believe deeply and decidedly that you are a foolish being of karmic evil, caught in birth and death, ever sinking and ever wandering in transmigration from innumerable kalpas in the past, with never a condition that would lead to emancipation. And the second is to believe, and decidedly, that Amida Buddha's 48 vows grasps sentient beings, and that allowing yourself to be carried by the power of the vow without any doubt or apprehension, you will attain birth. Right? So there's this twofold realization. One, of my own limitations, but because I'm limited and unable to achieve enlightenment on my own power, through my own ego self, that there is this timeless working of enlightenment coming to me, working for my liberation, and revealing to me this dual aspects, right? This paradox of my life. And it was in this realization of Dharma and enlightenment as a gift from Amida Buddha that Shinran saw his full humanness, which served as a foundation for his life. In a similar fashion, we can own our brokenness and transform our imperfections into a source of compassion. The Shin Buddhist path views the shadow of our imperfections as the reason for a life of awakening. Shinran describes this spiritual process in one of his poems from the collection of the hymns of the Pure Land Masters. He says, obstructions of karmic evil turn into virtues. It is like the relation of ice and water. The more the ice, the more the water. The more the obstructions, the more the virtues. This life of honest self-reflection and transformation is essential to understanding Shinran's view of human nature and of Shin Buddhist spirituality. How does this realization of imperfection function in our life? How does Shin Buddhist spirituality of imperfection lead to a life of transformation and change? So, according to the Reverend Dr. Taitetsu Uno, a very famous Shin Buddhist scholar, he says, this light of Amida Buddha not only illuminates our darkness, it transforms it so that we try our best to be compassionate with a sense of humility and gratitude, mindful of our karmic limitations. Humility arises for having been shown our karma-bound self, yet grateful for the boundless compassion that inspires us to act with a new and vigorous appreciation for life. So Uno's words aptly describes a Shin Buddhist spirituality of imperfection and how it can serve as a foundation for our lives. This dynamic relationship between an individual and Amida Buddha is at the heart of the Shin Buddhist path, which according to Reverend Takamoto Shigaraki, means that the Buddha's great compassion does not exist apart from our realization of our defiled passions and karmic sins. Great compassion exists necessarily when it takes in our karmic sin. This acknowledgement and acceptance of our imperfections is the heart of Shin Buddhism, which opens up the possibility of transformation and healing. Shinran's understanding of human nature and spirituality can be seen in this paradoxical relationship of truly living with our imperfections and limitations every moment of our lives. The karmic burdens realized by Shinran are the fundamental imperfections we all share as human beings. He came to understand that these imperfections are an integral part of who we are, are inseparable from the activity of the sacred in our life. It is only because of our imperfections and rough edges that the sacred exists and is able to embrace us fully. If our lives were perfectly smooth, there would be nothing for the sacred to grasp onto. It was only when Shinran embraced uncertainty, realized his lack of control, and accepted his helplessness, that his imperfections were transformed into the cause of spiritual awakening. It was only because Shinran had rough edges that Amida Buddha was able to grasp him. And it was only because of the gaping holes in his life that the Dharma, the teachings, had some place to fill. This radical acceptance of our imperfect selves is the essence of the Pure Land path. And so my life as a Nembutsu follower is about living in the embrace of universal compassion. My path is not rooted in perfection, but rather in the transformative power of fully accepting my limitations, embraced by Amida's compassion. The central life-giving question of Shin Buddhism focuses on becoming aware of the gifts we receive because we are imperfect. This is to hear, to reflect, and to respond to the call of compassion, which is always trying to expand our limited awareness. This is living in gratitude for the Buddha's vow. According to the Reverend Dr. Seigen Yamaoka, in Buddhism, gratitude is much deeper. The meaning is one of receiving sustenance, challenges, and meaning for everything in the universe. It is the realization that though through the interrelationships of all things, we are able to live and grow. This spiritual awareness is what transforms and heals. We become more whole by embracing our suffering as a natural and essential part of our being human. By understanding and caring for my own suffering, I can become a facilitator of healing for others. In this way, my limitations are transformed into strengths, which sustain my ministry and help me hear the call of Amida within the stories and in the lives of those individuals I serve. The affirmation of Namo Amida Butsu working in my life is a continual source of spiritual renewal, which replenishes my ability to be of service. This is the dynamic working of Amida's vow, to grasp, never to abandon. This is the activity of wisdom unfolding as compassion, which transforms my brokenness into wholeness. In one of Shinran's writings, he says, he describes this spiritual alchemy, which is catalyzed by Amida's compassion. When we entrust ourselves to the Tathagatha's primal vow, we who are like bits of tiles and pebbles are turned into gold. When we begin to see ourselves in this way, our lives are nurtured and we become more fully aware of our true humanness. Embracing my full humanness then empowers me to live with humility, with gratitude, and compassion for self and others. I am affirmed as a perfectly imperfect human being. Because universal compassion embraces us, we are just as we are. It is ultimately okay to not be okay, right? And for me, being LGBTQ, when I heard about this path of universal compassion, of a non-judgmental, a non-discriminative compassion which embraces me just as I am. That was healing. That was transformative, right? To know that being human, to be perfectly human, to be perfectly imperfect as a human being is the cause of my awakening, is the cause of my liberation and spiritual awakening. That for me was a powerful moment and a powerful way of viewing myself in relationship to the sacred. And so this is why so much of how I understand Shin Buddhism and how I understand my ministry really is a sense of being an imperfect companion to those I care for. I struggle along with my Sangha, with my community, especially right this past year of pandemic. We've all had to reassess our lives and to slow down and to take stock and to reflect on what's most essential. And realizing that I didn't have all the answers to get us through the pandemic. But by coming alongside those I serve as an imperfect companion, we struggled along together, right, as fellow travelers. In the Shin tradition, we talk about this term called ondobo ondogyo, which means fellow traveler, that each of us is on the same journey. And so as fellow travelers, we help each other out in our spiritual path and in the journey of life. And so that's what I've come to appreciate the most, is this way of viewing life in all of its complexities, in all of its paradoxes, with a clear sense of awareness that uncertainty is okay, that doubt is okay, right? That struggling together is okay, because of this fundamental embrace of universal compassion that we understand it to be as Amida Buddha. And so in this picture, you see a onenju, which is actually our prayer beads in Buddhism. And this onenju was made by a dear friend of mine from IBS, Reverend Aki Rogers. And for me, it's a symbol, right, of Amida's universal embrace, that no matter who, what, anything that we are embraced unconditionally by the working of wisdom and compassion. And so let me just show this final slide. And thank you very much for paying attention and for being here and for being part of this lavender lunch. And so this is just a gratuitous shot down the road from where I live in Kealakekua. And just, even though it has been cold here for Hawaii, it's been like in the low 60s for us. So I hope all of you are keeping warm wherever you're at. So again, mahalo. And thank you very much for listening. And yeah, let's have a conversation. So.
Thank you so much, Blayne. Yes, everyone, we're a smallish group of about 20. So if you have a comment or question for Blayne, please unmute yourself. I would also invite you to turn on your video if that's comfortable while you're asking your question, but the floor is open.
I would like to thank you for sharing your view of wisdom, compassion, and those things we call flaws or imperfections. And I think to have it here at PSR is a delightful addition to what we learn here. That's really all I had to say.
Thank you. I also saw in the chat that you had a question or something. So let me read that now. Let me see. So the statement about regarding exalting light, making it a metaphor for and equating it with the awareness about the nature of humans and boundless life. We can actually find that sacredness, that ultimate gratitude for ultimate compassion, when we habitually denigrate the dark, the shadow, the night, and all things black. In other words, a flaw or imperfection is neither a flaw nor an imperfection when it is intended to facilitate compassion and realize the universal embrace of wisdom. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, right. And so, right, we often dichotomize, right? Good and bad, light and dark, right? But humans, right, as we know, we all know, regardless of what tradition we come from, are both light and dark, right? We are just human beings that struggle along, right? And so what I appreciate in Shin Buddhism is that once we acknowledge the shadow, once we acknowledge all of our stuff, right, all of our baggage, you know, that, and we own it, that becomes the nourishment for us to be able to awaken, right? So in Buddhism, we have the symbol of the lotus, right? I think you're all familiar with that, right? That and the lotus doesn't grow in clear water. It cannot grow in clear water. A lotus always rises from muddy water because the mud, right, is the nutrients that the lotus needs to grow and to bloom beautifully above the mud, above the water, right? And so we can think of our lives like that, right? And think of all the things we go through, right? As that nourishment for us to be able to bloom beautifully, right? And to attain some level of awareness or awakening. So.
My name is Susan.
Blayne, if I might ask a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. I'll go and then you. So part of our work here at the Center for LGBTQ Studies in religion, as folks know, is many people come out of backgrounds in Judaism or Christianity, where what are frequently termed, you know, the weapons of sacred writings are used to denigrate people who are other, right? LGBTQ, people of different colors, different cultures. And I understand that the sacred writings of Buddhism are vast as the ocean. But a question of curiosity, in your experience, is there a tendency among some to use sacred writings from Buddhist traditions to argue against an embrace of a diversity of gender identities or sexuality? Just a
Sure.
question of curiosity.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think, you know, with every tradition, right? When people go to text, sometimes I think text can be used in multiple ways, right? And so people look for things that support or refute what they are trying to put forward. And so you know, and because, you know, Buddhist scriptures are so vast and so diverse that, you know, you'll find, I mean, certain passages or certain things which, you know, may, you know, have be taken in a way that would denigrate or would discriminate against people who are different. However, like, you know, even our own scriptures and the Pure Land scriptures, you know, we there's a passage in the Amida Sutra, the smaller sutra, which talks about in the Pure Land, in the realm of enlightenment, you know, there are different lotuses which have different colors, and they shine with different colors, with red and yellow and blue and white, and each of them are affirmed in the Pure Land, right? And so we can understand that to be that in the Pure Land, there is no discrimination in terms of how we are embraced, because each difference is allowed to shine. Each difference is allowed to be. And so, you know, but then there are other references in one of the other Pure Land sutras regarding women, and you know, back in the day when these scriptures were written, you know, women weren't considered suitable for enlightenment or to progress on the path of enlightenment, right? And so there was some problematic, like, you know, passages which talk about how, you know, a woman would need to be transformed or born as a man, reborn as a man, to be able to be enlightened, right? And so, however, right, when we look at that, while that's problematic, right, in today's understanding, back then, right, when the text was first written, you know, in the earliest centuries, that was liberative, right? That there was equating, right, that there was the possibility for enlightenment, right? Because before that, enlightenment was only reserved for men, or for, you know, and so it was this interesting way of dealing with that. And so I think in all religious traditions, you know, we all have, you know, things that we have to kind of relook at, right? As religion evolves, as time moves forward, how do we understand these sacred literatures, right? In our context. So.
Thank you. Susan, I'll pin you if you, I'm sorry for jumping in front of you there.
That's no problem. Really liked the whole concept of being imperfect, and it's our imperfections and our flaws and our scars that give the spirit a place to grab onto. I resonated with that, and I just wanted to hold that up and draw attention to it, because in a world where everything is black and white or light and dark or smooth and rough, it's nice to know that and to be able to tell other people we don't have to be perfect, that the imperfections are really what make us whole. And teach us compassion. So yeah, that's good. We'll leave it at that. I don't want to get too deep. It's too early today for me.
Right, and for me, that's why I appreciate this path and Shinran as a religious thinker, was that he was so honest about himself. You know, in his life story, right? He, you know, was ordained at the age of 9, right? And then for 20 years he was a monk, you know, up on a mountain, right? And after 20 years of study and intense practice of doing meditation and all these austere practices, he was no closer to reaching enlightenment than when he started, right? And because what he realized was he was a failure, a complete and utter failure in his spiritual quest. And so when he was awakened to the working of wisdom and compassion, right? That enlightenment, right? We think of enlightenment as a singular experience often, right? That this is something we achieve. For him, enlightenment was something that was coming to him, right? It was always approaching him, always embracing him, right? And so helping him to realize and to awaken to his own self, his true self, right? And so I appreciate the brutal honesty of Shinran, and as a model for our own journey and of having a certain sense of humility, you know, and being more self-aware of my limitations, right? As a human being, as a minister, as a spiritual caregiver, as, you know, a partner, as a friend, as a, you know, like all these things in our lives, right? helps me to reflect on that understanding of self, right? That my ego was always so great. Our ego, that's, in Buddhism, ego, right? The ego self is the cause of our own suffering, right? That's the cause of our problems, right? And so Shinran had turned that around, right? That to help us realize that we can own our ego. We can own this, but only when we acknowledge it and own it, right? Then we have power over it, right? Because it is part of us. So.
Any other comments or questions? Just please unmute yourself.
Hi, so I found this talk via Facebook, and I'm very grateful that you opened it up to everyone. And thank you very much for allowing me to attend. But I really needed this in my walk in life and spiritual practice, but also in my own embrace of my own identity. I've had a lot of trouble extending the same compassion to myself that I extend to others. So like I would very much never say the sorts of things I say or challenge myself on my own identity, or I mean would very much not challenge others on my own identity as much as I challenge myself. And I really appreciate this affirmation that it was okay not to be okay, and that I don't have to conform to everything that a label dictates in order to embrace and accept myself in that label. And I really want to thank you. This was something I really needed to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
Others, again, please unmute yourself and speak into the group. I'll have us take a second question. Is there someone else, or? Sorry, interrupted you, Blayne. I had a question from a perspective of ordained ministry. And I know that you're a graduate, obviously, of IBS and GTU. Being within a context, an interreligious context, studying with students who are certainly Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim, Christian. Could you say something about what that experience was or has been like to study for Buddhist ministry within this interreligious context?
I value my time at IBS and GTU very much because of the interreligious learning, and being able to interact and to learn from people of all walks of life, because that for me deepened my own understanding of my tradition, right? When you're having to have a deep conversation of what you believe and what your philosophy and what your theology is, right? I think that helps to clarify for ourselves, what we understand. And so it was wonderful to have, Buddhists from all walks of life, right, at IBS, right? So it wasn't just Jodo Shinshu priests or people, believers. It was also Soto Zen, it was Theravada, it was all the spectrum. And Nichiren, I know Molly is on the call, and so and in some of my classes, having students from other schools, like from PSR, like Dave on the call here, another person from JST and from other schools, right? To be able to, right, discuss right? Shinran's thoughts, right? Because, so part of our traditional learning, right, is we look at the writings of our founder, right? And so in some of those classes, I had a Catholic priest who was from Korea, and that the richness, right, of being able to understand Shinran's thought from his perspective, right, and to be able to have that dialogue was amazing, was enriching, right, spiritually, and just personally and professionally. And so, I really had gained a lot from my time at IBS and GTU, right? Especially because of, being able to take classes from other schools as well, and to be able to be in dialogue, in respectful dialogue with others. So.
Thank you. And we have time for one more comment or question from anyone. And again, just feel free to unmute yourself and speak into the group.
Maybe I just mentioned, I know most of you probably haven't heard of Shin Buddhism before this, right, or really unaware, but Shin Buddhism has been in America or in the West since the 1800s. So our mission here in Hawaii was founded in 1889 and came with the earliest Japanese immigrants to the territory of Hawaii, to the Kingdom of Hawaii, and then to the territory, and then to the state of Hawaii. But then several years later, Japanese immigrants came to the mainland US. And so our sister organization is the Buddhist Churches of America, headquartered in San Francisco. And so, so Shin Buddhism has been here for over 130 years in America. So.
Can I ask a question before we end? Speaking of interreligious relationships, is that in your tradition something that is actively being pursued, or is it that just kind of random people here and there?
I think it's more so random people here and there. I think each minister kind of does things differently, yeah. So, as we all know, but we do actually, as a mission, as organization here, we do a lot of interfaith work. We're part of the Interfaith Alliance of Hawaii here locally. We also do different projects and interfaith work. So as an organization, we've tended to be more proactive and more progressive in terms of interfaith relationships and dialogue locally here. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I first heard about Zen Buddhism from an attorney, actually. Her name was Angela O. And she left her practice, studied for decades, and then came back. They sent her back into the practice of law as a Buddhist priest. I find those combinations of things and perspectives so very important to our survival. Not knowing anything about Buddhism, I was invited to come to sit with them for a week's sort of introduction, if you will, many years ago in Los Angeles. And I was wondering if that kind of work, that interactive work, is still continued along the lines of what Mishun just asked. Cross-pollinating professions is what I'm talking about, not just religions and perspectives, because law and love kind of mixed together.
Right. So it's interesting, right? So the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni Buddha, as before he was born, was either destined to be a great religious leader or a great king. right? So and so he chose the path of the religious path. And so I look at the religious life and this profession as kind of two sides of the same coin sometimes, right? Of those aspects, right? And so I think you know, on a practical level, I think anyone, I think it's better to come to religion or to religious life with some life experience, right? To have a background or have some struggle and journey, right? Of real life, you know, to be able to be able to reflect on, right? And to apply the teachings, right? To that experience, because I think it makes us a more well-rounded minister and caregiver, to be able to, because it's not, right, because what, you know, working at a temple and you know, it's not just about doctrine and religion and philosophy and, you know, all these things, right? It's about the day-to-day of, you know, balancing your budget, you know, of meeting with your board and you know, and those relationships. It's all these things. You know, how do you, you know, we operate a preschool here as well, right? So this past year, working with the, you know, through the pandemic, how do we keep the, you know, reopen our school? How do we, you know, meet safely as a sangha, right? You know, all these things, right? You know, I think all those things help us to be better, and to better care for community, for sangha. So.
Great, thank you so much, Blayne. If I wanted to make mention that our Boswell lecture this year will be Lama Rod Owens, who will be speaking on love and rage, the path to liberation. So please go to our website, and that will be in April. We have a full schedule of events, including, if you can see my screen there, our next Lavender Lunch is in 2 weeks. And we have a PSR alum, Desiree Fontenot, who will be speaking on queer ecologies and climate justice. So I invite you to join us for that. And again, thank you, Blayne, for inaugurating our first lunch of 2021. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. And nice to see you, Molly. And Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.